Hello, Frank. You've always been on the cutting edge of maritime technology and software. What do you feel are the key achievements of this past decade, and how have they changed and transformed the industry?
Let me start with, can you actually hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'll be talking to Inmarsat and KVH about this. But yeah, past 10 years. You say I'm one of controversy. I was tempted to say there's been nothing. But of course, it's not entirely true. If we look at the operational side of maritime, we've seen this explosion in the acceptance of using VSAT and communications. But I don't think we're where we should be yet, because many ships still don't have anything like the right kind of connectivity. The other thing, which of course has come through regulatory and happened finished off during my time at Transys, was this use of ECDIS rather than paper charts. Again, some discussion about whether it's done properly or not. The use of simulation has grown much faster. The use of virtual reality is now becoming something that people want to do. That's some movement towards voyage optimization. Unfortunately, all of these things are somewhat fragmented in the way that they are moving forwards. But nevertheless, the biggest thing is an awareness of technology. I think we're getting started, so it's the awareness of technology. Perhaps if we look at, from a commercial aspect, AIS tracking, the use of tracking voyage cargoes, and the whole ability of trading freight is perhaps the best example of big data from companies like Cargometrics. So I think in that side, they've gone a lot further than perhaps in voyage operations. But we are starting to have much more awareness from owners, driven by charterers as well, but just driven by the desire to have a more cost-effective operation.
Well, Frank, though, what do you think has been the barrier to date to embracing technology? Has it been the evolution of that technology, or has it been culture of shipping? Has it been cost?
Culture of shipping, I think everyone likes to fall back on culture of shipping, but in my view, it's a continuation of developing one-off innovations and tools that are not necessarily what the owner's been looking for. And then there's a failure, and I put myself in that bracket too when I was selling to the industry, that the failure to provide the value proposition. And we haven't made the case. And I think technology companies have been building what they want, not necessarily what the customer needed. And we lack collaboration. For a true digital solution, we continue to build fragmented solutions that don't talk to one another. Wärtsilä, ABB, MAN, all the big guys build proprietary systems. We need to find a collaboration to move forwards. And it's not just the manufacturers, it's also the major stakeholders like the owners and the charterers. And that's where we will go to the next level. So we need collaboration for a full, true, digitalized, connected solution.
Yeah, you referenced the fact that there are too many fragmented solutions out there, and certainly collaboration is a strategy, but how do we get there? How do we develop those places of trust, if you will, in order to bring together a highly competitive commercial industry?
Angus, the reference to a carbon-free world, or the reference to an environment, may drive us towards a place where we have to be more collaborative. You're starting to see the major cargo players driving the discussion on environmental ships. And I would reinvent, I'm not in charge of this idea, but I would reinvent the IMO in a different form, or reinvent who is going to drive the industry, and have major stakeholders in the owners market, major stakeholders in the chartering market, everyone come together and agree how this should look, rather than allowing what is effectively a government body to spend years and years developing regulations. They're much more effective in the airline industry, but we just have to do it different, because if we keep doing the same thing over and over again, we're going to get the same result.
Well, as a mariner, you speak of fragmentation of technologies. Do you feel there should be more standardization and consolidation in this sector?
Absolutely. There's no doubt. I mean, I'm not advocating the airline industry model as perfect, especially when you look at what's going on now, but that's not their fault. But two major airline manufacturers, two major engine manufacturers makes things a lot more simple. I'm not saying we can get to that place, but when we develop regulations, we put far too much flexibility in how things should be developed, and we leave too much, and it's too easy for too many players to enter in to the market, and then you end up with too many solutions that don't talk to one another. And by the way, that places a big pressure on the crew as well as in the office. So if you're sitting in a ship owner's office or a ship manager's office, it's extremely difficult to listen to 5 or 6 vendors coming through the door telling you, well, their widget is the best and their piece of gear is the best. And then it turns out that their Rectus doesn't talk to the other autopilot, and the data logger doesn't talk to the other system. And it's an impossible task for Maritime to move to a place where you can have a solution that works. It's much better in the leisure industry, where they use NEMA 2000 and standardized data buses to talk to one another.
Well, you've just referenced a number of different groups. You've referenced the IMO. Yeah. You've referenced commercial industrial companies, and you've referenced ship owners. To get to that point of consolidation, where's the driver?
Charterers. Charterers have to, we talk about CSR. People talk about CSR and it's very glib. But if charterers want owners to build ships that are environmentally friendly, if we want it, then everybody needs to be a stakeholder in the solution. And it's been blindingly obvious to me with the crew crisis that we've had over the last 6 months that not all the stakeholders have been participating at the right volume that they should have done. And they all have a role to play, and we could have solved that problem, and I believe we could solve other problems if the charterers really exerted their strength, because they have the power to charter new ships, charter clean ships, or environmentally friendly ships. They have the power to drive that solution. But when you have a conversation with a lot of them, it's, well, the owner must just build it. It's up to the owner to come up with the money. And I think it's too simple to just rely on supply and demand in this solution. We are at a point in our industry, technologically, environmentally, where it is truly up to, if the big charterers, who are effectively the big tobacco of shipping, if they want to clean this up, they have the power to drive it by demanding ships that provide the solution. And if Jeff Bezos came into this industry, I bet that's exactly what he would do. So we need to find a way to collaborate together. Now, you are starting to see some charterers who are saying, going and committing to owners to build dual fuel ships, for instance. Provided you build a dual fuel, I'll charter it from you for X or Y. But we need to take this one step further. We really need to sit down and have a conversation where all the stakeholders do it for the betterment of shipping rather than just for the betterment of their own area.
Well, last week we saw the Sea Charter come into play with the charterers talking about, the area of decarbonization, but the era of digitalization is that plus more. How do we develop those levels of collaboration when you're talking about commercial efficiency, for instance, which ultimately does drive increase environmental efficiency because it is route optimization, et cetera. But how do we make the case for collaborating and standardizing on the operational efficiency and technological efficiency?
So I think this is going to happen in a slightly different way. I mean, I've come from the navigation side. I come from the voyage optimization side, but that isn't the biggest problem in my view. We've been using weather routing long before we had these fancy systems that people use. So it is possible to do route optimization without running a fancy software program. Where we're going to see true digitalization take off and true optimization takes off, in my view, is going to come because of this new development in the desire to have new fuel, have different fuels, have more effective engines, because the newer engines will be more complex. The newer engines will have optimized tools, they'll have sensors, and they will be kitted out from day one with the ability to monitor them and run them and predict them both on board and ashore. And that, in effect, will drive the model of digitalization. That, in effect, will drive the innovation towards a much more cost-effective industry. And because we haven't made the case, people talk about just-in-time arrival of a ship, but even aircraft circle the runway before they land. A lot of owners actually like their ship to anchor a day or two so they can clean up and do things. But what they really want is a ship that runs fuel effectively and within the charter party, within the contract they have with the charterer. And as we get rid of the older ships and put newer engines in that are more technologically advanced, the case for digitalization, the case for modernization will get made because that side of the industry is going to advance rapidly.
So you didn't feel that we had enough change in the last decade. As these new ships are being developed, envisioned, planned, what do you expect to see in the next decade in terms of greater efficiencies and in terms of technological tools? What do you expect to see in the realm of digitalization going forward?
So, one of the things I thought was, what do I think could speed it up, was get rid of all ships over 15 years old, and build ships that are more, that would change the dynamic. And so in Wallem, in other managers, in owners now, everyone's talking about dual fuel with LNG, or is it hydrogen, or is it ammonia? But I think that's where the advance is going to come. That's where over the next 10 years, no one's going to build a ship that is single fueled, and people are going to think very hard about what kind of ship they're going to build, and they have to future-proof that ship in such a way as they don't have to rip the guts out of it in 5 years' time if the authorities come up with some new idea. Now, currently, of course, the regulatory bodies take 5 years to come up with an idea, but with building these more complex ships, that brings more complex training. It provides more sensors on the ship. That provides more ability to run data, to do a complete, that provides the office with more information. It allows more collaboration between the ship and the shore. So what I think you'll see over the next 10 years is much more emphasis on the predictive maintenance, much more emphasis on the effectiveness of the engine and the effectiveness of the running of the ship, because you will have access to the data in a way that was never seen before. And that in turn will allow people to have much more visibility and much more transparency into the direction that we should be going in terms of technological advancement of engines. I mean, navigation is navigation, but the building of engines and the building of data operating and data monitoring is going to explode, in my view.
Well, you just mentioned exploding. We've been talking for the last couple of years that the industry is in a period of disruption. Do you really feel that the industry is in a period of disruption? Is it really happening?
No, because my definition of disruption is a completely different model, and I don't think we've seen a different model yet. We're in a period of innovation, and we don't know where we're going at the moment. But for it to disrupt, I think you've got to see a completely different model, or a new player come in, or old players disappear to such an extent that it completely changes how the industry operates. And I don't think we've got there yet. Certainly not technologically.
Okay, well, we've talked about the increase in technologies and the need for more increase in technology. But the most complex, and at this point, the most important piece of technology that we have on all of our ships are the mariners, are our seafarers. How has their role changed in the past decade? How will their role change in the next decade? And what can we do better to support the mariner in the period of change?
We can treat them like human beings. But I think, unfortunately, the advancement of more technology on board has, at the moment, has only increased the workload on most of the seafarers, because we have, and it's an old saying, but we have layered more and more technology on top of old systems and processes, and we haven't got rid of enough of the paper, and we haven't got rid of enough of the old ways as we put new technology on board. I mean, we're still having the argument in some circles about paper charts. We're still not there with electronic logbooks. We're still having conversations about the way the oily record book should be filled in, and can it be on paper, and and then you're just giving more and more and more paperwork to these seafarers. A lot of this could be done in the office and sent to the next port. I don't know why the ship has anything to do with it. We do the bare minimum training. So the emphasis on simulation training, the emphasis on proper technology training for liquid cargo handling of LNG or ammonia or hydrogen is going to grow, and we have to change the way we train people. I mean, I think online training is going to grow exponentially. Not on board, I might add, because they simply don't have the time. But ashore, the ability for you to do your training anywhere. But it all comes with trust and respect and training these people properly, because the more we micromanage them, the less incentivized they feel to do a good job. And that's when we have accidents.
There's a statistic out there that says that 90% of the accidents that happen on board ship relate to the human factor. And it's very easy to point to an individual or individuals rather than that complex matrix that makes up the entire operational entity. Yeah. What needs to change? What needs to change?
Well, what needs to change is training, I think. It needs to start with proper training up front, when they say it's a human error, they'll say something like, well, he didn't know how to use the ECDIS properly, or it was a radar-assisted collision because he didn't know how to use the radar, or something like that. But that makes it a human error, but actually what it makes is a failure of the industry to train people properly and implement a proper protocol. The STCW needs to be completely rewritten. We need to get to a place where we don't certify people to the lowest common denominator. We certify people to the highest level. We need to have more repetitive training. To operate to the lowest common level, you get what you deserve at that point. When you look at ECDISs, they put their buttons in different places. They bring out new versions. The screens don't work the same. This would never happen in the aviation industry, where there is a standard. You learn to use one kind of bridge on a cockpit, and you learn it, and you learn it, and you learn it. And you're checked, and you're checked, and you're checked. That, if we had more rigidity towards our training and the quality of our training, you would produce better seafarers, less likely to make what are termed as human errors, but actually they're inadequate training errors.
Okay. Frank, what is your outlook for the next decade? What do you see?
In which way? I mean, I see the slow death of carbon-fueled ships. And I certainly see, I believe ship managers will be shown, third-party ship managers will come into their own simply because the desire for technology consultancy is going to grow, because there are so many different kinds of engines coming out. I really see the challenge over the next 10 years as coming in the development of how we propel our ships and making sure that we become a green industry or a cleaner industry. I do see a drive from some quarters to reduce manning and try and use this as an opportunity to put less people on. I think it's extremely short-sighted. We will eventually have less seafarers, but we will have more people perhaps ashore with higher qualifications. But before all of this can happen, we need to get some clarity on just what kind of ships should we be building. Mm-hmm. Because the VLCC, what is it going to become? A very large water carrier? Because if we're not carrying crude anymore, then so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Oh, we've just learned that the earlier communications issue was due to an Elon Musk satellite and had nothing to do with the other vendors. Thank you very much. Frank, you've been wonderful. I appreciate your time and your insights. You are always disruptive, and you always give so much to our industry, and I thank you for that. We're now going to pivot to our first roundtable on the Decade of Digitalization, and our chief correspondent is Elizabeth Jackson, CMO of KVH. Thank you again, Frank, and welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Carlene. Good morning, good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us today. Throughout this session, and building on several of the points Frank just made, we're going to take a look at the progress and future of digitalization. I'm going to share a brief overview of some examples of how that can be brought to life. And there will be a panel discussion with our experts that you can see on the screen. And then there'll be an interesting poll at the end of our panel discussion. If you can put my slides up, please. There we go. Next one. So there have been significant shifts in the past decade that are accelerating this digital revolution. First, the move to high-speed connectivity, as slow L-band speeds and high costs were not sustainable to support the increased data needs. Second, the move beyond the Noon report to also include real-time data. And third, the move beyond the bridge, where mechanical equipment now has digital outputs that can connect via sensors to deliver data to the cloud. Next slide. Digitalization and the connected ship are here. The connected ship means ship-to-shore data transfer. But beyond that, IoT is accelerating as well, driven by the focus on operational efficiency. The prediction is that the connected ship market will more than double in the next 10 years to over $14 billion in value. And investment in digitalization continues to grow. Next slide. Yet there is still another decade of work to be done. The key question is how quickly it will accelerate. The key areas of work that I think include moving to machine data, which is true IoT. Rather than human to human, it's machine to machine. That is Internet of Things. Second is the standardization of common platforms for data compression and cloud storage, for example. And then also aligning decision makers with those who benefit from the P&L impact. You know, Frank talked about charter party dynamics. That's a perfect example of aligning who is paying for the IoT, who's paying for digitalization, and who's benefiting. Next slide. This market disruption of COVID will indeed accelerate trends that have already been underway for years. Data consumption increased quite significantly during the lockdown. Crew was stranded, not able to change or go home, and so the increases of data usage, both for operational and crew, were enormous. As maritime mirrors behavior on land, every device and machine are now being connected. COVID also forced quick changes in how things were done for remote surveys, for example, which I believe will now become the norm, as it works, and it's much cheaper than sending a person vessel by vessel. Next slide. What's different in the past year is not only that IoT is here and here to stay, but it's now becoming a competitive advantage. There are well-established maritime business models, but when they converge with IoT, business can be and is being transformed. Next slide. IoT will disrupt the business of maritime. First, there's data transfer, and that's needed for regulations. Then different players start to see that there's a benefit of saving money. But the future is to drive new, profitable revenue streams. And data gives you the power to get a competitive advantage and will change the hierarchy of maritime. New players that offer service contracts and data analytics will be the new winners in the industry. Next slide. Let's briefly look at how I think 4 maritime service models will gain a competitive advantage with digitalization. Shipyards are in the service of system integration. Today, they focus on the cost of an asset, but they've already shifted their focus to total cost of ownership. And in the future, we'll be adding new subscription service revenue for the lifetime of the vessel. Next slide. Equipment manufacturers are in the service of operational reliability. Today, the focus is on break fix and limiting warranty costs. Tomorrow, this will shift to proactive maintenance contracts with service subscription revenue as well. Next slide. Ship managers are in the service of vessel availability. Today's focus on cost savings will shift to higher billings with the ability to act on IoT data that enables more days of availability. This will be one of the core underpinnings of the transformation of the maritime industry. Next slide. And crewing. Today, the focus is on safety and regulations. The goal is to reduce the cost of crew on board. But with digitalization, the business model can focus on shifting expensive talent to the shore to handle remote interventions, one expert to many vessels. And the crew on board will become the ones to take the action to optimize performance of the equipment and voyage as directed by the shore-based expert, rather than waiting to take action at the next port. Next slide. I think digitalization fits on a spectrum. The maritime world has moved beyond basic regulatory requirements. Most vessels already have some element of real-time data feeds for monitoring and making real-time decisions, not just on the vessel, but ship to shore and shore to ship. And the next phase of IoT that is happening is the use of AI and big data to optimize performance. And the future is not just P&L savings, but generating those new profitable revenue streams for the future business of maritime. Next slide. Let me give you an example of the use of IoT big data. At KVH, our VSAT systems have IoT proactive monitoring built in with over 150 data points from thousands of systems being analyzed by big data every day. In one report, we identified there was an issue with a part in one system. Rather than accepting that every single future field service visit would need to check on that part to see if it needed to be replaced, which is expensive and time-consuming, we were able to look back at 3 months of data for similar indicators. And of the thousands of systems we have fielded, we identified that only 2 additional systems had that issue. So we could focus and solve the issue proactively before the customer even knew. KVH does both edge processing and big data processing to proactively optimize, quickly and extremely low cost. So it's already happening in the industry, and this trend will continue to accelerate. Next slide. And let me give a real example of changing a business model. KVH introduced Agile plans 3 years ago as a way to allow ship operators and managers to change their connectivity provider without any CapEx. The unique connectivity as a service model has changed the game in maritime purchasing decisions. So again, the business models can change. It's being done. Next slide. And now we're changing the game for IoT with KVH Watch. Next slide. When you think about all those 30+ major equipment systems on a vessel, they do not have access to their own connectivity and can't afford their own VSAT system. But with KVH Watch, these equipment manufacturers and IoT service applications can now get their own connectivity, and with flow and remote expert intervention, they can monitor and take action to troubleshoot, all remotely. That is what digitalization enables. Next slide. So think about how simple it is for each of us, right, even today, to have a video conference or send a file when we're all on shore. But at deep sea, there are challenges to make that a reality. But the first steps towards digitalization in IoT can be quite simple. Here's a short video targeted to equipment manufacturers that brings this potential to life. Please. Thank you. So now we will continue our conversation about the next decade of digitalization as we shift to the panel discussion. So I'm joined today by several experts across the maritime industry. I'm happy to welcome Tobias Groger with StormGeo. He's leading the shipping sales team for the North and South Americas. We also have Aziz Bamit, General Manager for GTT North America, which is the leading engineering company in the shipping and storage of LNG and other liquefied gases. Mark Warner joins us from Inmarsat, where he is Marketing and PR Director of Maritime. He also has previous experience at ShipServe, which I think is a really interesting conversation for digitalization. And welcome Sanjan Gupta, who is a director at Sitara Shipping. She is an advocate for diversity in the maritime industry and a founding member of WISTA India. In addition, we're joined by my colleague, Mark Woodhead, Executive Vice President of Mobile Connectivity at KVH. Mark has over 25 years of experience in the maritime industry with expertise in commercial shipping and IoT. Welcome. So let's begin with our first question. I'm going to ask this of Sanjam and Mark Woodhead. How much has digitalization changed the shipping industry in the past decade? And how has it changed? Sanjam, can you share your thoughts?
Thank you so much. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody from whichever part of the world they're joining in. I mainly belong to the container industry, and I can share from my experiences there that the processes have definitely got so much simpler. I remember a decade back, to collect a delivery order, something as simple as that, we had to physically send somebody to the office of the shipping line and collect a paper delivery order with the container seal. Today, of course, that process is online. Something as simple as getting in the container into the port, we had to go and take a physical Form 13 back home here in Nava Shiva. Today, that process is online. You just need to go online, and we have a port community system that makes things so much simpler. I think these are the basics that have really benefited the trade down the line. And of course, we are now seeing blockchain, we're seeing the e-bill of lading, which has really made a difference, though it's still a long way to go.
Those are great examples. Thank you. Mark Woodhead, what are your insights?
I'd say the decade, there's been quite dramatic change. It's only 12 years ago since we launched KVH, our first VSAT network, but also the same, it's only 12 years since fleet broadband was launched. So, I remember a time when, adding attachments to emails was quite a big issue for many ships, whereas now, particularly in the time of COVID, using Teams, using Facebook, WhatsApp video are quite regular practices now across the industry. So things have changed dramatically. I think the main change has been for the crew. Being a seafarer a decade ago is very different. Frank talked about the additional amount of work that digitization has brought for them, but also the ability to contact home has changed dramatically. And I think that the business side of shipping probably hasn't changed as much as it has for the seafarers. But over the last couple of years, with services like Watch and other IoT services, we're going to see that accelerate very quickly.
Thank you. So this next question is for Aziz and Tobias. Where do you believe digitalization has had the greatest impact in shipping? Aziz, please share your insights.
Yeah, thank you very much, and very pleased to be with you today with so prestigious panel of experts. I am myself not an expert in digitalization, but we, as GTT, has embarked in the last years in acquisition of company to improve energy efficiency. I'm glad to be among these experts. I would say that we are slowly moving from manual operation to more assisted operations, but there is still a long road to have the majority of fleet on remote operations. When it comes to performance and emissions reductions, monitoring, I would say for me, is the first step of optimization. Indeed, monitoring allows us to know and act and eventually share good practices across a fleet. The next step is optimization. But as I said, we are not completely yet there. And there is a huge aspect on digitalization and how it could improve the overall logistic. And in that extent, I like really the comment that has been shared by Gupta on the container feedback, how things were going a few years ago and how they are going today.
That's great. Thank you. And Tobias, if you think of what he just said around the first step being monitoring and the second step being optimization, can you share examples and additional insight from your industry and expertise?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. First of all, like my other speakers, co-speakers said, good morning, good afternoon, or wherever you're located on this beautiful planet. Happy to be on this panel as well. Well, following this, I mean, if we speak about monitoring as a first step and optimization as a second step, for sure, digitalization significantly helps in both aspects. Now, when it comes to the monitoring side of things, and as Frank mentioned before, we are running in a more and more connected world where the engines are, where more and more sensors are installed, etc., etc. Digitalization definitely helps to increase the accuracy of the insights by monitoring better and more effectively the incoming data. So that said, a typical example, for instance, is a flatline reporting. I mean, it's still common in the industry, but with the digitalization and the efforts are put in place, it's much easier to detect whether there's a flatline reporting up and running, which then in the end will also help to better address a cooperation and a collaboration between the shareholders, mainly the owner and the technical managers on the one side, and the operators on the other side. Now, when it comes to the second aspect, the analytics part, for sure, their digitalization can as well help in, for instance, applying AI and machine learning algorithms on top of the set of data. So having an engine running and predefining some set of KPIs, where then in the end a skilled engineer, a skilled ex-master mariner ashore is then analyzing data and is giving a human judgment to what has been processed by a computer.
That's great. Thank you. I'm going to shift now to looking to the future. So for this next question, I'd like to get input from our satellite connectivity experts, Mark Warner and Mark Woodhead. So how much will digitalization change the shipping industry in the next decade, and how will it change? Mark Warner, can you please share your insights?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Elizabeth, for the question. So I think it also, I mean, at the moment, obviously, the maritime industry, as Frank said earlier, the maritime industry is now probably at its most pivotal moment since containerization, which is now, 50, 60 years ago. And there's going to be a revolution in ship design. And obviously, there's the quest, for decarbonization. And I think it's, digitalization will go hand in hand with that revolution around and the quest for decarbonization. And I think some of the speakers have already mentioned it. You've got everything around, vessel data optimization, real-time data, getting the data off the vessel in real time. At the moment, it's very much, and you said it was on one of your slides earlier. Noon reporting is the way of getting data off right at this moment. But now, in the next few years, obviously that will be real-time data powered by the satellite connectivity that we both know is coming, and the capacity is available. The speeds, the bandwidth will be available as well. So it's really about that kind of getting data off and analyzing that data and the vessel performance analytics that come from it as well. And what you will also see is, powered by the decarbonization trend and the changes in ship design, you will see more and more ship technology providers coming into the industry. One of our recent research showed that at the moment the ship tech market is probably worth about 100 billion. By 2030, it's going to be worth 300 billion. You will see companies outside the shipping industry, and for example, vessel performance, a company like Nautilus Labs, which is Microsoft backed. You'll see other third parties coming into shipping and backing kind of these application providers, and that will obviously also speed up the disruption of the maritime industry, which Frank talked about, and kind of really ingrain digitalization into the shipping industry.
That's great. Thank you. Mark Woodhead, what do you think?
So to follow on what Mark said there, I think the speed of change is going to be quite dramatic now. We've spent a significant number of years in which the industry has tried to manage without data, tried to control as much of its business practices as possible without the ability to connect high speed from ship to ship ashore to ship. So that has changed, and the industry and the regulators, as Frank mentioned, need to catch up with that. But that is going to see the ability to connect as a supplier, as a shipyard, as a service provider, as an owner, a charterer, to be able to connect the vessel and to get information on a real-time basis from both the machinery and from the crew is going to be hugely dramatic in our industry. I think we'll see that change make things far more transparent. So the ability to know what's going on, as you mentioned earlier, Elizabeth, before it happens, as well as monitor it while it is happening, and then the ability to intervene through high-speed video or support is going to change how the industry works, where its crew are going to be. And I think one of the key things that hasn't been mentioned at the moment, I think if you're a middleman at the moment in shipping, you're in quite a comfortable place. But as connectivity and digitization is seen on land, I don't think there'll be much room for middlemen going forward as the suppliers and the other stakeholders go direct to the customer. So I think that we will see the speed of change increase dramatically over the next decade.
Thank you. And what about COVID? Mark Warner, what do you think in terms of the role the pandemic has had on this change looking forward this next decade?
I think it's really seen an acceleration of digitalization, Elizabeth. I mean, what we've kind of, from our platform, what we've seen over our high-speed internet service is, we're even in the 3 months between March and June, in March, end of February, the average vessel, and that's across all our vessel types, the average vessel was doing around 4 gigabytes a day. By the end of June, beginning of July, the average vessel was doing 6 gigabytes per day. So we're kind of seeing a 30 to 40% rise in data volumes. Now, of course, some of that is driven by crew traffic. But as mentioned before, we're also seeing remote application usage and a real kind of need for that, telemedicine applications. So I think what you're seeing is a real acceleration of digitalization. Companies are realizing that they need connectivity, further connectivity into that vessel. As Mark said, they want to do, Teams calls, Zoom calls, etc. They want to know what's going on. They want to be talking to the crew and using applications. And I think, COVID has seen an acceleration. Now, of course, it caused huge issues from a crew perspective as well. And what it's also done is, shown that crew technology has been underinvested, really seriously underinvested for the well-being of crew. The well-being industry is worth billions of billions, but for the crew and the crew welfare, there's been a real underinvestment in technology as well, and that's obviously been proven by COVID.
Yeah, and Mark Woodhead, what do you think in terms of the pandemic and what's going to accelerate, particularly areas of investment?
We have seen the same trends at KVH with more data being demanded from both crew and from the business operations of the vessel. And I think things like remote surveys are something that a couple of years ago nobody talked about. But we have been forced into a situation where an industry where so many of us travel 3/4 of the year have not been able to travel at all. And we have got our heads together and, organizations, class societies are doing surveys remotely that they'd have never considered before. So I think people have finally been forced, necessity has forced them to consider using digitization to change their practices. And I don't see us doing anything differently or going back to where we were once we come out of this pandemic.
Great, thank you. Aziz and Sanjam, can each of you please share what aspects of digitalization in shipping do you believe need greater attention and investment? Aziz, please share your perspective.
Yeah, it's a very good question. As we all say, one cannot manage what cannot be measured. So the quality of data is key. We need precision and we need the accuracy of data. We need also an ability to validate the data through cross-validation. So having solutions to ensure that both the solution and the components are implemented successfully is the best approach. And this is really what we as GTT, we are taking as an approach. The other aspect which is key is really flexibility. While it's easy to connect on modern vessels and perform analytics, this is not the case for older vessels. So a small investment is needed in order to be able to connect to the existing devices. Sensors are not necessarily on board. So I like the introduction during the previous panel, saying that we need to get rid of the old vessels. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind that the shipping industry is going through an unprecedented crisis. As of today, less than 500 new ships has been ordered this year. This is a very, very small amount. We are 5 times less current shipping market. And I would say, last and not least, we need not only to be flexible, but we need also to install systems on board quickly. So there is no point to tell to someone that you will need several months of calibration before they start to get to some results. So that's why we need to pay attention to flexibility, standardization, make sure that any system that is going to be plugged in can be plugged in regardless of the hardware that is installed on board. So all these type of details that are not really details that will make the difference and will increase, I would say, the penetration of digitalization.
That's a really interesting comment. In a recent conversation I had with a service company around vessel performance optimization, they agreed that the calibration to be able to optimize, the time could be cut at least in half. Instead of months and months, it could be days or weeks to get more real-time data if they had that connectivity. So that's an interesting comment. Sanjam, what are your thoughts?
Okay, speaking from the importance of digitization and the simplification it provides in the entire supply chain process. Speaking from that point of view, I think digitalization alone cannot really offer those solutions. So, for example, we have big players like DP World coming in and offering end-to-end solutions, right? So they were a port player, but now, say in India, they're investing heavily into cold chain, into warehousing, and they're going to be providing end-to-end solutions to customers. But even though they are going to invest heavily in digitization and provide solutions, I think unless we're going to work with the regulatory part of it, the customs aspect of it, we really can't simplify that, because in countries like, say, India and Bangladesh, where the customs processes are so complicated, that could be a hindrance. Number two, I think it's also people. We keep thinking about digitization, but we should also dwell on the importance of the people, because we may have great solutions, but we do need to make sure that people are trained to handle those systems. The third aspect, I think, is cybersecurity, because I think we all are so depending so heavily on technology these days. Right from working from home, doing our virtual meeting, everything is being done virtually. And how protected are we? So cybersecurity is a very big threat, and we need to make sure that our systems are safe. The last thing, again, to do with people, I think this offers huge opportunity and greater investment, not only in digitization, but in people. So work from home has given us this amazing opportunity of hiring people that could be not even based in the same city, in the same country, but in different parts of the globe. So I think these aspects need to be considered very strongly, and not just focusing on the, just digitization. These aspects need to be considered along with it.
That's great insight. And so let me ask a follow-up question on the people side of things. So Aziz, you talked about it as well, about all the need for data analytics now, right? So as we get more and more data, and Sanjam talked about the importance of people and perhaps hiring or training. So who's going to do the work of the data analytics? Are those people in your company today? Are those ones you need to outsource? Is that a new industry for Maritime? Aziz, do you have perspective on that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the human factor is not to be neglected. We have to use the tools that are at our disposal for better simulation and better training, because still a lot of things will remain on the shoulders of the people, either at sea or onshore. But one thing to keep in mind is that while you introduce such devices, the approach you have to take is to be an end-to-end integrator. So you have to have smart people in all aspects of the Internet of Things, of sensors. But I think the key will be to not neglect the real operational expertise. Because once you have the data, you need the ability to understand it and to translate it into easy, understandable guidelines. And you need to be able also to have a critical view on what you are looking at. If you are managing that as a set of data with like a black box, and you don't have real expertise on operation, then you may miss and misguide and give wrong advice to your customer. So the approach that we are taking at GTT as a group is really being an end-to-end integrator with a real data analytics, I would say, capability, but with a lot of operational expertise. Because if you don't do that, then you will have to transfer to owners, charterers that will have this system on board, the need for them to have experts in order to be able to interpret this huge amount of data. So I think for me, the key for the providers, of course, is all the technology part, but also invest in human and invest in operational expertise. And I think the last 2 points are key to make the penetration successful.
That's great. Great insight. Thank you. The next question we're going to shift to is what is necessary to transform the business model of the commercial shipping industry to best leverage these benefits of digitalization? Tobias, I'd love your perspective.
Sure. I think what is necessary in that context is, and as it has been addressed by Frank earlier on, is that we need to have, we need to create an environment where cooperation and collaboration, mainly between the charterers, the cargo owners on the one side, and the owners and the technical manager on the other side, is much better supported. These days, processes are heavily disrupted. I mean, there's this charter party or a contract of affreightment sitting in between mainly, and that dictates who and how are vessels driven and how is it performed. So just to give an example, I was just recently speaking to one of our customers who is on the operator, on the cargo owner side. And that company is so much interested in driving down the emissions, so reduce to explore what options are available to cut the fuel bill. Now, because of their contractual situation with the owner on the other side, they do not have any influence at all on the decision-making process. So in that aspect, if let's say the environment, the business environment could have been changed towards something to support a better cooperation by eventually rewriting charter party contracts, by rewriting the contract of affreightment or whatever is binding those two parties, if that could much better support a sharing of data between those two companies, then I think we are in a much better way to leverage the benefits of digitalization. The aspect from the owner side, for sure, is that as they are responsible for the asset, they are, even though they sit on the data and they theoretically could share the data, they are not willing to share the data because they fear that if they do something and they open up more and more their doors, that the operator who sits on the other side could use those data in return to hand in claims. So that said, well, if we can change, let's say, the business environment by rewriting the contractual situation, I think that would very much help our entire industry.
That's great insight. Mark Warner, what do you think about the business model transformation?
Yeah, and I think it's just picking up on what Tobias said there. I think, yes, there definitely needs to be more collaboration, and it's important, and that's across all players, in that kind of maritime supply chain. But the other area I'd say is that, a kind of mindset change, and it has to come from the top as well. And Tobias talked about the issues of kind of, owners reluctant to do this, and you're seeing it. What the good thing is that the job titles kind of Digital Insights Director, Digital Transformation Director in ship owner companies is increasing. Even data scientists, which was a job role that wasn't there even 5 years ago. You're seeing a lot more shipping companies employing, data scientists, and there is more of a digital first mentality from the C-suite, and I think that will really help. Kind of, that mindset change, and the movement from top will kind of then filter down, and then you will have less of the problems that Tobias mentioned, and you'll see kind of, more open collaboration and more into data sharing and all of that. But it has to be driven from the top down.
That's great. Mark Woodhead, what are your thoughts?
Well, building on the back of what Tobias and Mark have said, I think the traditional model in shipping is to make the owner or the manager take the risk. And the reason for that is the data and the connectivity to transfer that data isn't available for the supplier to take on that risk themselves. And now that is available, the data is available, the connectivity to get it to shore is available, and the analysis is available, I think we'll see a lot of changes in the risk that suppliers are willing to take on. And rather than sell services into ship managers and ship owners, we'll see services come with connectivity and come with data analytics, which will allow the supplier, whether that's the engine manufacturer, equipment manufacturer, service provider, sort of multi-card service provider, would be prepared to say, all right, I will provide subscription services using the data and the analysis I can get, rather than I want my money up front, I want to sell you this service, and then you'll see the value afterwards. And that shared risk is something that I think will start to transform the business models we see through shipping, as suppliers are willing to take more risk than they were previously.
That's great insight. So we're going to move to the poll in just a minute. So I have one last question for all 5 of you. I'll ask if you just give a quick 10-second response to provide your insight. But what is the primary financial benefit of digitalization, and which party is the one that is going to receive that financial benefit? So Sanjam, if you could go first, please.
Yeah, so I think greater efficiency for sure, and I think that one of the primary recipients would actually be the cargo owner, actually, because in the end, it's their cargo that's going to be handled smoothly.
Great, thanks. Mark Warner.
Owner, fuel savings, predictive maintenance, so avoid massive expensive repairs, and also don't forget the time that it now takes for analysis and reporting. So that's from the owner's side, from the charterers, transparency we've talked about. And then also don't forget that there's, the application providers who are coming along as well, and there's real kind of financial benefits to them. So they will benefit too.
Great. Tobias?
I mean, it's benefits. I think that's obvious. It's first of all, let's say, the fuel or the consumables, which you can reduce, be it fuel, be it running hours, et cetera, But it's also, as it has been mentioned before, time-saving aspect. So we definitely can help the industry to reduce the working time. Now, who will receive those benefits? Well, these are actually the people who pay for. So as it mentioned before, cargo owners, they pay for the fuel typically, so they see the benefits on the fuel efficiency side. When it comes to the hardware, mainly the owners, those are in charge and responsible for the assets.
Thank you. Mark Woodhead, what do you think?
Yeah, there is some real inefficiencies in the industry. Primarily, improving the time with which you can data and analyze it, and improve the speed, improve fuel performance. All these inefficiencies will start to be ironed out, which there'll be benefits for everybody in the chain, and then ultimately the customer, as Sanjam said, who's providing the cargo or the customer who's buying the products at the end of the day, these efficiencies will be all passed on.
Thank you. Aziz, take us home. provide your perspective and any last comment around digitization for the next decade.
Yeah, I think it has been said, improve energy efficiency as a whole, and hence lower OPEX, whether it's a fuel saving, maintenance cost, and at the same time, less emissions footprint, because don't forget that there is also a to reduce emissions. It also helps to mitigate the operational risk. I heard a lot of people saying that it would benefit to the cargo owner. I would say for me, but maybe I don't have enough experience, the only way it can work is to have a win-win game with shared benefits after definition of a baseline. And when I say that, I say across all the stakeholders. I think if we limit that to only one winner, it's going to be very difficult to convince the other stakeholders to take part of this endeavor and to play the game.
Thank you. So I wish we had more time. Let's continue the conversation offline. But thank you to the panelists for sharing your insight and expertise today. We really appreciate it. And I will now turn this back to Carleen to share the results of the global poll that they conducted and get audience input on a couple questions around digitalization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. And thank you to the panelists. We do have some live polling available, and so go onto your platform in order to affect that live polling. But let us show you now the results of the global poll, which were conducted over the last 2 weeks. And you'll see the questions that are asked in the live poll, as well as the answers. The first question is, where do you believe digitalization has had the greatest impact in shipping? We'll see operations, communications, as well as commercial management seem to be the leaders. And the next one. And where do you believe the greatest impact of digitalization will be in this decade? Operations, commercial management, environmental impacts seem to be the leaders. So please go onto the web platform and cast your own ballot and see how you compare with the global poll. But I'm here now with Huge Downs. Huge has been following all the proceedings and is now going to give us his perspective on what he heard this morning. Huge?
Well, thank you very much. Is that Barbara Walters there, or is that Carleen? You
Barbara
guys look
Waters.
like twins. Oh,
Barbara Waters.
Good morning. Good morning, Barbara Waters. How are you today? Being a dinosaur, I've got 3 takes on this. One of the questions that was asked was, who benefits? And from my perspective, and looking at your poll, everybody benefits by this digitization. The other take, one of the marks mentioned that it had to be driven from the top down. Unfortunately, from a dinosaur perspective, the top players now, or the CEOs, the C-suite people, are old timers. And they have to be driven by the people at the bottom. So the people at the bottom have to get the word up to the people at the top, so the people at the top know what they're doing. But once it gets there, once they bite into this, it's going to be driven from the top, I can tell you that. The third point was looking at the ship management itself. A number of years ago, we took off the radio operators. Deck officers are the ones that are in charge of that now, maybe. But it looks to me like we're going to have to put somebody back on board who might be the chief digitization operator on board the vessel, to interconnect everything that goes on there, make sure that the noon reports that go back are accurate noon reports and stuff like that. So those are my 3 takeaways. But again, I'm a dinosaur, so forgive me.
Well, thank you very much, Huge, and I promise not to tell CMA incoming Commodore Lois Zabrocki that you referred to her as a dinosaur. We're now going to take a commercial break for 15 minutes. We'll be joining you back at 10:30 Eastern. Thank you for joining us.